What do you think about what we've been seeing in the past, well, I mean, over the last 2 weeks? Worrying developments, yields soaring for those core Eurozone countries.
Well, it's been very worrying, but I think, as far as I'm concerned, this has not really been very surprising. I've sat in this chair over the last, year and a half, and we've had roughly the same conversations, and each time they haven't dealt with it. The thing is going to escalate. Which country is it going to go to? And we've talked about Spain, we've talked about Italy. The question, I think, is, can these leaders who seem completely incompetent, are they actually going to prevent it moving to the next one, which is obviously France? So what we started with in Greece, we've spread to smaller countries, and the crosshairs have moved. Are they really going to stop it? And the story of a second Greek bailout, that's not going to stop it.
So this is pretty worrying, because you're saying actually we should be looking to France now. Does this mean that they're already behind the curve on Spain and Italy? They can't do anything to stop the contagion?
Well, I think that's probably right. If you think, if you started this thing with Greece and you said, can we really fix this? Can we show ourselves as capable? I think if you're as a policy maker, one of the things you do as a monetary policy maker, you worry about setting interest rate and you worry about expectations in the future. What these folks have shown is they're incompetent, they're unable to deal with the crisis, and going forward, people think, well, what are they going to be able to do? They've made matters worse. And I always think the moral of this tale ought to be, do no harm. And these Europeans have actually done lots of harm. They've made the crisis worse, and the markets are getting ahead of them saying, we don't believe you can stop this thing.
I mean, a lot of the experts and people that we've been speaking to, especially with regards to Italy, have said, listen, nothing has actually changed in Italy's underlying economic fundamentals. So yes, you know, growth has been worrying, it's not been particularly good, but nevertheless, they haven't had too bad a recession, they haven't had to inject any stimulus, so it's more to do with market perception. So, I mean, is there still time to stop that very dangerous self-fulfilling dynamic in the market? What do they need to come up with on Thursday?
Well, I think they have to come up with a realistic plan that's really going to put a stop to this and let people realise that growth is a really important question. You can't impose austerity on these countries, which ultimately sort of destroys their growth.
But that's what the market wants, right?
Well, maybe the market does want that, but what we've seen is that the austerity measures haven't worked. Growth has been compromised. Growth in the rest of the region's compromised. And I think if you look at the case of Greece, they don't have a sensible taxing authority. They don't have competition.
Trying to reform that now.
Oh, a little late. I mean, a little late. We've sat here for a year and a half since. We should have been thinking of that a year ago. You have to come up with credible plans, and they haven't.
But the truth is, I mean, these sort of deep-seated structural reforms that you're talking about, I mean, people are saying this isn't going to happen in a few years. They're not going to meet the targets that EU policymakers said. It's going to be a generation.
Well, I think that's right. And I think one of the big issues has been you impose these austerity measures and you say you must pay, you give them expensive debt, and you say you pay it back over a short period. These are long-term structural issues. You need to take a long-term view of things and give a credible strategy and basically give them, it'll probably be low-cost debt, maybe even zero cost.
But the problem is the market isn't willing to give them that sort of time.
Well, they had a chance 18 months ago. Now the difficulty is to actually stop things. I think they've got to jump in, do something really quickly now, and show that they're ahead of this game. I'm not clear how they can do that, but the Germans are certainly going to have to eat up some of the costs of this. And Chancellor Merkel, who you were just talking about in these various meetings, the reality is you have to stop this thing now, or it's going to get worse. And I worry that it will actually move to France. You need to stop it. You need to stop it now. And I don't know if there's the political will to do that.
They need to stop it, and I guess one of the key obstacles to any consensus and agreement, and I suppose this will emerge on Thursday, is the role of private investors.
Right, and the worry is that if they started to impose some haircuts on those private investors, that amounts to a default, and then all of a sudden the risk-free premium in these other European countries goes away, interest rates there rise, growth in the euro area is higher than it is lower than it would have been. So now we have, I mean, that's what the classic contagion. This should have happened a year and a half ago. Sorry, chaps, you've made a mess of it. Fix it.
I mean, we've seen already borrowing costs rising for Italy and Spain, haven't we? I mean, for Italy at one point they surpassed 6%, and 7% is the point that's thought to be unsustainable by many. What happens if the same thing happens to France?
Or too awful to imagine. But there's other mistakes going on. We saw a rise in interest rates last week. That had an effect. We also saw another set of stress tests that weren't stressful again, and so the markets are reacting. It's not just one thing. It's interest rate policy, it's being credible to the markets about stress tests. Every single time these European institutions and leaders are confronted with an economic problem and an economics 101 test, they fail it every time, and it makes it harder the next time. So the markets are probably doing their work for them and forcing them. And I'm still not very optimistic. No. Thank goodness the UK didn't join the euro.
You were making a very interesting point before about banks right here in Europe, and you said, well, we've had the stress tests, and a lot of people were expecting that we might see a bit of a rebound in bank shares. Right. But actually, even the banks that passed with flying colours, the big strong banks in Europe, I mean, everyone's shares were down across the board yesterday. What does that tell us about the level of interconnectedness?
Well, I think people have underestimated the level of interrelatedness. And if you look back at what happened in the previous crisis, Gordon Brown called it the great crisis of globalization. And the argument, I think, was that people simulated the failure of a single bank. They really didn't understand the interrelatedness of the system. Well, that was true in 2008. Why would we imagine that that interrelatedness had kind of gone away? So the danger is that things that happen in Greece move to Italy, but maybe they become more global. So the worry was, we would not perhaps have predicted that UK banks, Barclays, Lloyds, RBS, would have seen such 7% or so share price drops yesterday. So I think this has been a global crisis over the last 3 years. We actually are all in this, some more together than others, but nobody's really immune. And in some sense, you can move to the US situation. Things that happen, follow the reverse logic, things that happen in the US, and we start to see worries about the US hitting a debt ceiling. The question is, does that have repercussions on others as well? And presumably the answer is, it probably does.
But I guess right now they're struggling to agree on a plan to raise their borrowing limit. David, do you think that they will meet their August 2nd deadline?
Well, I think, yes. I think there's two ways to think of it. The first is, I talked to Geithner the other day, and Geithner said actually what you should expect was a lot of showboating. Real progress had been made. So the first thing is, hopefully behind the scenes, real progress has happened. The second thing is that there is a plan going on with McConnell and Reid.
So Geithner is saying that they are making progress.
Geithner said, and I think he gave a speech at Dartmouth, and he said real compromises have been made on both sides. People missed that. Let's hope that's true.
I wonder if those compromises will include tax increases.
Well, the thing he did talk about was the compromise. Well, the thing they've been really pushing are tax increases for people making $2.5 million a year and more, and removal of subsidies on aeroplanes. And Geithner was a lot of times he's used this analogy with Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett's line has been, I pay less tax than my secretary. So this looks like politically quite a line to play. Hard to argue to the general public that people on $2.5 million shouldn't pay more taxes. So there's a game going on there. But I think compromise will have to come. I think the leadership of the Democrats and the Republicans want it. The problem for the Republicans is to control its new freshman congressman. So I think we'll probably see some kind of deal with one. The argument going on right now is sort of short-term deals that can prevent hitting the debt ceiling.
That's precisely the problem. It's very short-sighted, and even when the borrowing limit is raised, you still have this budget deficit to contend with. Does the US risk at some point, if not before August 2nd, sometime afterwards, losing its top-tier credit rating?
Well, obviously Moody's and S&P and so on have talked about the possibility of that. I think it's the idea that the US could possibly lose its credit rating is, I just think, crazy. I mean, I heard Bernanke the other day in testimony to the House talking about. He actually said, I think it was that he thought the US would lose 1 million jobs if that happened. It was unthinkable, and that this deal had to be done. I mean, I have in my mind over the last 250 years, Greece has been in default for 200 of 250, and the UK and the US never. And they should. I mean, the actual possibilities.
It seems to be something. I mean, it seems to be, Geithner himself, Barack Obama. This is the language that they're starting to use now. I mean, it may be to force those negotiations forward, but even the credit ratings agencies are saying, listen, we're worried about a default.
I think that's right, and I think what we've seen around the world, my worries, particularly we've seen in a number of these countries, we've seen politics trumping economics. And I wrote a column this week which said, I always thought economics in the end would trump the politics.
There you go. Nice line to end on.